Guys, the dynamics are fantastic. So here we go. Let's rev it out again a little bit. So 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. Right there, as I let up, I can start to like kind of feel the VTEC kick in. But welcome to Drive Culture. I'm Jonathan Rivers, and today we have the 1991 Acura NSX. And I'm going to tell you why this is one of the best sports cars of all time. So we'll go over the exterior, the interior, the powertrain, and of course, take it for a drive. So if this is content you're after or you're new to the channel, please be sure to click that bell to subscribe to come back for more. And with that, let's get after it. This is it, guys. I've been waiting to bring this car to this channel because this sets the stage for the entire Acura brand. Now, if you've already watched the channel, you know we kind of got ahead of ourselves and put an NSX Type S, the new NC1 second generation NSX on the channel before we got to this NA1 first gen NSX. But definitely, if you haven't watched that video, be sure to click and like that as well. But this is it. Like I said, this is what started it all, and it changed the game, quite frankly, across the entire industry, not just for Honda and Acura. So first, let's talk about this specific car. So thanks again to the American Honda Collection Hall. Carl and Patrick are the best. They're letting us use this car here. It's a 1991 Acura NSX. I want to say right now there's a little over 65,000 miles. So, you know, somewhat high mileage, but somewhat low mileage, depending on how you look at it. I mean, the crazy thing about these cars today is to get something in this good a condition with really low mileage, you're well into the six figures, right? I mean, these cars' prices are just shooting through the roof, especially low mileage examples. But this one here, you know, was kind of kept away for a while. It has been driven by several journalists over the years. You know, it's had a regular maintenance done to it. It's been really well upkept. And the tires, which we'll get to here in a sec, are really the only thing that's been kind of updated and changed. Everything else is bone stock, just like when this car rolled off that dealership lot back in 1990, right? So a long time ago, right? This car is 33 years old. So that's pretty amazing. But let's talk about the NSX. So a lot of people don't know, Honda actually had their first concept car. And recently they've actually shown that to the public. I think they brought it out to Monterey Car Week, and that was called the HPX. Now that stood for Honda Pininfarina Experimental. That car was not necessarily an NSX, right? But that design language, this kind of like crazy glass, that extended from the windshield all the way back, that kind of set the stage for what this car would eventually become. So that came out in 1984, right? So the middle of the 80s, Honda's like just getting back into F1. So they start development of this vehicle, and all they wanted to do was use that as a framework and also bring that F1 technology to the role. And so when they did that, they then started work on this crazy car, which had so many world firsts. And the fact that it was an all aluminum semi-monocoque body, I mean, they were the first ones to do that before the other supercar manufacturers, right? And so setting the stage, they brought the NS-X concept to Chicago in 1989, and they blew everyone away. And you can read all the stories about it online. You know, one of my favorite insights into that was the CEO at the time, Kume-san. He literally gets into the car at the auto show and starts banging it off the rev limiter, right? Hitting it up to 8,000 RPM in the middle of a Ford press conference, right? So Ford eventually got Acura back when they launched a second gen NSX, but you know, it was really cool that there was that much excitement for this car when it launched. So then ultimately the car came to production, they dropped the hyphen, and it became NSX, which stood for New Sports Car Experimental. Now, jumping ahead, again, if you've watched our second generation NSX video, you'll know that that car became New Sports Experience, right? So the letters aren't just mashed together. They actually meant something, and it meant what the team that worked on this car, what they were trying to achieve. In this case, Shigeru Uehara, who was the chief engineer for this vehicle, they really wanted to bring that F1 tech to the road. They wanted to bring that aluminum body tech to the road. The first implementation of VTEC to the road too. So, I mean, a lot of world firsts here. So with that said, let's talk about the pricing. Now, when the NSX first launched as a 1991 model year here in the US, the MSRP at the time was $60,000, 600. And that was actually pretty good pricing for when the car launched. Now, the car had a very long life cycle, right? It goes all the way from 1991 to 2005. And by the time you got to that last model year, the price on the car had actually ballooned to just under $90,000 MSRP. So the pricing went up, competitors got better, they learned from this car and got better. And so that put NSX into a difficult position. But despite that, over that almost 15-year life cycle, Acura sold just under 10,000 Gen 1 NSXs in the US. So it was a popular car, especially for those that could afford this kind of technology at the time. Now, beyond that, right, throughout the life cycle of NSX, there were some key changes, right? So the car launched as a 1991 as a coupe. Just several years later, 1995, Acura actually turned the NSX into a Targa top. You actually take the T-top off. From there, in 1997, they essentially had a mid-cycle refresh. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the powertrain section, but they bumped up the engine output and power in 1997. And then finally, in 2002, they actually got rid of these iconic, pop-up headlights and went to the fixed headlight design, which finished out the design language going into 2005. So that was obviously a lot to cover, gives you the full background, hopefully, but we'll get into some more details here. So next, let's go ahead and talk about the exterior design of Gen 1 NSX. So the car that we have here is actually painted in Sebring silver. So it's a pure silver car. It looks really good. It helps to show off all of the angular body lines of the Gen 1 NSX. And again, I think honestly, even though the fixed headlight design looked really good once they introduced that, there's still something uniquely iconic about having those pop-up headlights, which was a signature design back in the 80s and 90s. And here on the NSX, I think it just looks so clean. It looks so good, squared off perfectly. What's really cool, and also you may not have known about the NSX, was it was actually the first car to don that Acura caliper badge, right? So before that, remember, Acura launched in 1986. It was the first Japanese luxury brand. It actually launched only with two cars, right? The Legend and the Integra. But those cars, when they launched, they didn't have an Acura caliper design yet. So NSX was the first one to actually brand it and have that logo right there on the hood. Down below, you can see they also got fog lights, functional openings. This car was, a big component of it was aerodynamic design, right? I mean, having that lightweight body, having that aluminum monocoque to build off of, they were able to make this completely functional from every angle. So for me, as we make our way to the side of the NSX, this is where I think I might like it the best. It literally looks, even today, like a modern supercar, right? A lot of it is the length of the vehicle, the profile, but it just has this awesome stance, right? And, there's so much glass up front with the windshield. It's kind of all pushed forward. And honestly, you could actually remember hearing this from the engineers. They were trying to make almost this like fighter jet style cockpit, right? And it's evident not only inside when you sit in the car, but it's evident even from the outside as you take it all in. Now, one of the things that we'll talk about here is, like I said, the wheels and tires, specifically the tires on this car were actually updated, right? I mean, it's 33 years old. You can't run on the original rubber. But NSX had a staggered wheel and tire setup. So up front, even though these are new Falcon tires, they kept the original size on them. So up front, you only got 15-inch wheels, but they're 205 50 ZR15 tires on here. So the original spec, those awesome classic 5-spoke wheel designs. Again, you can see in the middle there, it actually spells out Acura in the hub, right? So even then, they weren't putting the caliper there just yet. So that's still a cool early Acura's design element. Now, as we make our way to the side and towards the rear, you see that functional scoop on the side of the vehicle that, the air just kind of carries in. feeds this mid-engine beast, right? So really cool that they had that element in there as well. Also, again, I like the fact that like the top was black, right? So that really makes it stand out, even on this Sebring silver vehicle. So as we make our way to the rear, one thing I'll touch is on the door. I love the fact that they actually had NSX scripted out there right in front of that door handle. That design element actually even carries to the second generation NSX as well. But here we go to the back. The tires, like I said, are a little bit wider in the back. So now you're working with 225/50 ZR 16-inch wheels in the back. So you got a larger diameter, a wider tire setup as well in the rear. But as we make our way to the back of the NSX, I mean, this is it. This is just that iconic view. And I think what so many people not only remember, but actually remember seeing, because the NSXs were blowing by them back in the day, right? So you had that iconic kind of singular LED tail light strip, right? And the fact that it not only kind of carried all the way over, but it actually goes up into that rear wing that is built into the deck lid, right? Which looks so iconic, right? And looks so good even to this day. Clearly it spells out Acura right there in the rear. Again, they weren't using that caliper anywhere other than the front of the vehicle. Down low, dual exhaust, nice oval tips, aggressive rear diffuser. Again, I think this is the view a lot of people got to see of the NSX as it was taken off right in front of them. But to me, I think even to this day, this car still looks like a real supercar on the road. And it's kind of cool too, if you guys also remember back in the day, that generation of Honda Accords also mimic the rear design element of this NSX, because that's how iconic it was. They actually wanted to bring that to their mainstream Honda products of the day as well. So with that, I think we've covered all of the exterior details on this Gen 1 NSX. Next, let's go ahead and hop in the interior. All right, guys, here we are in the interior of this 1991 Acura NSX. Now, let's talk about this particular car. Again, this car has just over 65,000 miles. It's literally 33 years old, and despite that, it's in actually really good shape. Of course, there's, you know, basic wear and tear given how old the vehicle was and that it was actually driven a decent amount, but despite that, the car is held up really, really well. I think part of that is because originally the NSX offered a lot of premium touch points and pretty good materials throughout the interior. A lot of that was also questioned, right? Because back in the day of supercars, right, you know, they didn't have this kind of daily reliability. They didn't have like good materials inside. Oftentimes they would fall apart because they were handmade. But with the case of the NSX, you know, being built in Japan, it had a ton of pride put into it. And again, the fit and finish and materials in here are still really good to this day. So let's talk about what we're dealing with here. You know, the steering wheel was a great shape and size. It was leather wrapped. Very simple, right? But it does spell Acura out on the airbag cover. Again, they weren't using that caliper all over the place like they do today. There's two buttons for the horn. There's two buttons here for the cruise control. So they had that function back there, a resume and set function. So yeah, I mean, overall, it was very simple. Now behind that, you have kind of like two thin stalks. One was for your turn signals on the left. The other one was to control your wipers. Behind that, you've kind of got like these mega stalks that like come out of the steering column. So, you know, over on the left is actually the button for the cruise control, as well as the functions for the headlights. And it's super cool because as you roll the headlight switch over, even from where you're sitting, you can see the headlights pop up. So that's a really cool actuation there. Over here, you got your window defroster, and this big button here is actually for your hazard lights. So that's kind of interesting. But then straight ahead, I mean, man, looks so good even to this day, are the gauges on the NSX. Super big font, white font, black face, orange needles, like classic 90s JDM look. Has this kind of like brushed aluminum surface over the front of the gauges. Still looks really premium today. If that was in a modern car, I'd have no complaints. it still looks really, really good. And of course, being a performance car, you got other gauges on there as well. Looks really nice. And then behind that, you have a couple more small buttons to adjust like the brightness. And there's even a TCS for the traction control system that can be pushed to reduce and turn off traction control as well. Here in the center, so part of it, right, is like, again, they were trying to make this like a cockpit style design, you know, using a fighter jet as the inspiration, but it really feels that way. Everything kind of does this teardrop design coming down. HVAC controls, hard button, but easy to use. This particular model launched with a tape deck. So really going back, you know, not even at CDs yet, right? You know, basic audio controls. Here is essentially a little, you know, lift this up. Cigarettes, right? You know, people like, you know, have their ashtrays and stuff like that. And then you come down to the business. Now, we'll talk about the powertrain during the drive, but you've got your manual transmission here. It's a 5-speed on the launch cars. You got a, you know, full side brake here, little cubby space next to that. And then you've got the NSX like stamped into this. It's like actual metal here on the armrest, and it's nice. You know, there's a little bit of space inside, nothing worth bragging home about. This massive piece here is your glove box. Pretty good space there. And then as you kind of look around, right, let's talk about the seats. So the seats are super comfortable in this car. They're power seats on the driver. You know, you can scoot forward, you can actually recline back as well. So there's not a lot of adjustability, but you don't need it. I've got lots of headroom in here. You know, one of the things was these first few model years when the car was only a coupe, that actually gives you more headroom. My understanding is once they went to the Targa top design, that kind of, you know, lowered the roof line, you know, maybe reducing some headroom for people, but I don't feel that at all. I feel like I got lots of space. On the doors as well, you know, good materials here. And the vents for like the HVACs are actually like here on the door. So you've got the two in the front, but everything else kind of carries off to the door, which is interesting as well. So again, NSX was a really nice place to be. I love that it had NSX in the floor mats, as well as NSX also stamped on the side sill as you step in, and it says Honda Motor Company and things like that. So that iconic Honda design carried over into this vehicle. The last thing that I'll say, and again, we can cover this as we do the drive, is just how well you can see out this car. I mean, despite being a supercar, you have excellent visibility, even by today's standards. You got super thin A-pillars, lots of glass up front. The hood line is low, the dash is really low, so excellent visibility out front, out back, or out on the sides, and out back as well. So as I peek back, although you've got that big rear wing, it doesn't impede your view. So again, I think that was one of the things about NSX that helped change the game for supercars, because there was a lot of compromises that you had to deal with the competitors. So with that, next, let's go ahead and just check out the cargo space of the NSX. All right, next, let's go ahead and check out the cargo space of this Acura NSX. So I've already got it popped open. There was a little button there on the door to do that. Of course, you could also use the actual mechanical key here, but I'll go ahead and lift it up. It's a little heavy, but once you have it in an up position, it stays. And yeah, there's actually good space back here. It's a nice kind of carpeted material as well. My understanding is that actual cubic space was 5.4 cubic feet of space back here. So, I mean, you could easily fit, you know, two kind of medium, you know, bags, maybe even a small suitcase back here to take on your weekend road trip in your supercar. So even back then, I think that was unique in its design and in the supercar era. Like I said, there was a lot of compromises that you had to make, but Acura completely changed the game with their packaging and layout on this vehicle as well. So next, let's go ahead and talk about the powertrain. All right, next, let's go ahead and talk about the powertrain of this 1991 Acura NSX. And just look at this engine bay. I mean, first of all, you know, you got to hit this little lever inside to get the glass to lift up. And then you manually lift up this cover here, which has this kind of carpeted surface to it. And then you got, you know, your, prop rod here that you just set. And now you can take in the heart of the beast, as I'll call it. So, because that was really what this car was all about, was this engine and the technology that they brought to this car, right? Dual overhead cam, variable valve timing and lift electronic control. That was the first application on this V6 engine. A lot of first here's, right? Also having things like titanium connecting rods. I mean, real racing and F1 technology brought to the street, and in a mid-engine rear-wheel drive layout that Honda and Acura had never done before. Like, again, going back to when they were doing development work in the 80s, my understanding is they actually used a Honda Jazz, like a Honda Fit style vehicle, as the foundation to start plugging and playing and, making these kind of monster, prototypes to finally be able to figure this out and make it work as well as they did. So let's talk again. This is the 1991 NSX, which means it's the NA1, right? So this kind of first generation, first pre-mid-cycle refresh. So for that model in this vehicle here, it used a 3-liter V6 engine. Now, it was the C30A for you true NSX fanboys out there. In this configuration, it made 270 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque, made it exclusively to a 5-speed manual transmission. Now, down the road, they eventually came out and brought an automatic to the scene. I believe that was a 4-speed automatic that they brought to pair with this engine. But eventually, they got to 1997, and that's when they updated the powertrain, and it officially went from NA1 to NA2 designation. So in that case, they actually beefed up the engine. It went from a 3-liter to a 3.2-liter V6, and the power went from 270 to 290 horsepower. And that 5-speed manual got upgraded to a 6-speed manual as well. So there were some kind of clear differences going from NA1 generation to NA2 generation. But what we have here today is the NA1, and there's no better way than to prove this out than to get behind the wheel. So next, let's go ahead and take this thing for a drive. All right, guys, here we are inside the 1991 Acura NSX, and we're gonna go ahead and take this thing for a drive. So go ahead and put my seatbelt on first. Very excited to drive this car, guys. So here we go. First, let me show you the key fob on this thing. So it's really cool. It says NSX on both sides. Not a lot of design to it. It's not fancy. It's one of these old school mechanical keys, but this thing is actually made out of titanium, just like those connecting rods in the engine. So I'm sure this thing is pretty expensive actually, but really, really cool. So next, go ahead, clutch in, put the key in, give it a couple twirls. Car starts right up, no problem. So this particular car is actually, like I said, let's turn the AC off. So it's in really good shape. It's got 65,000 miles, but this car is 33 years old, right? So of course there's gonna be little squeaks and rattles that come through, but I mean, for the most part, this car is actually in really, really good shape. And over like smooth pavement, it's super compliant. So we're gonna go ahead and drive this a little bit, even show some of the performance. So side brake down, into first gear. Still has that kind of like notchy feeling to it, which is really, really good. But we're gonna go ahead and take off. So just a little bit of application of throttle. You don't need much, and yeah, it just takes off. And just even first gear, shift to second, it already feels special. It's really, really good, and it sounds really, really good. I can't wait to ring this thing out here. So one of the things I want to talk about is actually like the steering, right? So it's old school. It's that hydraulic, steering, right? So it's not the electronic steering of these modern cars, and you can't adjust it. There's no drive modes. There's none of that. Like the NSX is the NSX. So with that said, the steering is actually pretty heavy. Now, when you're out driving and you're crushing back roads, like that's obviously ideal. But one of the things that I noticed is just driving around town, or more importantly, like parking lots, the steering is actually really heavy. You got to get used to it. But obviously, it's not a deal breaker for buying an NSX, but it is something you'll have to get used to. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of get out in the traffic a little bit here, but just letting this thing kind of rev out. It sounds so good. It sounds so good. And the other thing about this car, right, with that all aluminum semi-monocoque body, you know, world's first technology back in the day. This car is rather light. It's just over 3,000 pounds, so a really light vehicle given you know, the size and the proportion. So they used a lot of lightweight materials, right, to keep that down, and because of that, you know, again, 270 horsepower and only 210 pound-feet of torque by today's standards, that's not really necessarily impressive, but for its time, that was super impressive. And the car actually put out really good dynamic performance specs as well. This car, even with the manual transmission, was like basically 5 seconds 0 to 60. Apparently, random fact for you, is in Japan they had a different gearing than the US models, and apparently those cars could actually get to 60 even in under 5 seconds. So the car is far from slow, even by today's standards, and it just sounds good. It's awesome. So, I mean, it is moving, guys. It is moving, and there's my heel and toe. There's my Ayrton Senna there for you guys. But I mean, this car is quick and the gearing is kind of tall. So like, actually, as you're riding out, I would say like by time you're like in second gear, if you're riding things out, I mean, you're probably close to like 80 miles an hour. Like, you're moving in this car. So despite it being this old, it still has, like, you know, performance that is really good by modern day standards. And like I said, the dynamics behind it, the sound behind it, it truly makes this thing a dream to drive. So let's rev it out again. Here we go. It sounds so good. And the crazy thing about it is not only does it sound good, but, you know, again, this car has VTEC, right? So like VTEC kicks in at about 5,800 RPM. But unlike something like the Integra Type R or some of the other high performance cars that they later came out with, where it was like almost this like on-off switch when VTEC kicked in this car, you don't necessarily get that. It just starts to go really fast. It just kind of quickly builds speed on you. So let's go here. Got a couple of turns, and like I said, oh man, the steering, you know, when you're in a parking lot, that's one thing, but as you're actually like getting into it dynamically, having this like heavy-weighted steering really helps. On center's perfect. Man, it's the NSX, guys. The dynamics are fantastic. So here we go. Let's rev it out again a little bit. So 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. Right there, as I let up, I can start to like kind of feel the VTEC kick in. But man, dynamically to this day, this car is fantastic, right? Like the way it turns in, it's so flat. I think the ergonomics, the visibility, everything about it like caters to the driving experience. I mean, and of course over time, you know, competitors got more horsepower, they got faster, but again, I don't know if that matters, right? I think even in today's market, we get so caught up on specs and the numbers, but this car, even though it has good specs, even by today's standards, it's not about that. Like, it's about this just authentic and very like pure driving, you know, feeling that I don't know many cars that can replicate that. So here we are, I'm in first gear, 3,000 RPM, and yeah, it moves and it sounds so good. And like I said, I mean, around town, unless you want to like go into some silly speeds here, you could like stay in like first and like second gear. Like, yeah, you know, I mean, you probably got to get in the highway speeds before you're getting up even in the third. I mean, especially if you're revving it out. So here we go again. Oh, it sounds so good. At the top of the RPM, man, it is like screaming, man. It sounds so good. I hope the camera's picking this up for you guys, because having the engine right behind you, right? This is a mid-engine supercar. Having that naturally aspirated V6 growl, like it sounds so good. I can't stop. So here we go, one more time, 3,000 RPM, just second gear, batting it out. Okay, there we go. I finally got up into third gear. I can't say how fast I was going there. I mean, this car is awesome. And then there's my heel and toe. This car is so good. It's so good. It's a thing that like, this was a thing 30 plus years ago. It makes you realize, you know, why Ferrari had to go, wait a minute, we got to change some things here. Like Gordon Murray, you know, who worked on the McLaren F1, You know, he even said back in the day, like he went back after benchmarking the others, you know, from Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsche, whatever. When he finally got a chance to drive this car, all those other performance benchmarks went out the window because the way this car drives, and a lot of it is, again, is the suspension, the chassis, everything is just so fine-tuned in this car that it's hard to beat. And like I said, even by today's standards, of course, there's supercars that have a lot more, you know, basically double the or triple the horsepower of this car today. But I'll bet that, you know, when you're looking for just the pure driving experience, being this low to ground, having like this good, like, you know, visibility, it's gonna be hard to beat. And with a sound like this and a manual transmission like that, again, I'm not sure you can beat it. So let us know your guys' thoughts and comments down below on the Gen 1 NSX. Are you a fan of the NA1, the NA2? Are you more of a fan of the newer NSX, the NC1? Again, we already have a video of that here on the channel, so be sure to like and watch that if you haven't already. But for me, just being able to drive this car, the nostalgia, the performance, the sound is just so good. I mean, I'm so lucky to be able to do this, but we're happy to bring more. So let us know if you guys want to see more content like that here on the channel. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this video up. All right, guys, that's a wrap. What did you think of the 1991 Acura NSX? Is it truly one of the, if not the best sports cars of all time? Let us know your guys' thoughts and comments down below. Again, like I said, after being able to drive this car, which is now 33 years old, and still see how, you know, unique and how invigorating and just all the emotions that you get from driving a sports car like this, to me, it definitely ranks near the top of that list. So let us know also if you want to see more classic cars like this on the channel, more high performance sports cars like this on the channel. Again, we're happy to bring it. So if you've joined us before, thank you so much. But if you're new to the channel, please be sure to click that bell to subscribe to come back for more. Thanks, and we'll see you at the next episode.